Alan Myers here. This is another episode of For the Republic. I'm very, very happy to have sitting with us today, Mr. Constitution himself, Douglas V Gibbs, and the war hamster, Brady.
Cheers.
Boy, that is one scary background you got today.
Who, me?
Yeah.
I just haven't had time. I just walked in the door. I haven't had time to put up my normal green screen. So
no
let's see what I
worries.
can come up with.
No. All right. We got all kinds of fun chitter chatter today. We, of course, will open with, what do we open with? Wackadoodle news. Because there's nothing stranger than wackadoodle news. Hey, do we ever get around to electric vehicles on this program?
A number of times.
Well, we're going to do it again.
Wackadoodle news is better than maybe like a montage of hamsters running on wheels. So
no. Come on, that's all about fitness and impressive physical abilities. Here we go. Electric buses. Apparently, electric buses are having some problems around the country. In that, well, they're broken down, they can't get fixed, or they're too expensive to fix. According to an article from the Denver Gazette, Colorado Springs Mountain Metropolitan Transit has 4 e-buses they got in 2021. They're not running. They cost them $1.2 million a piece. Now, don't fret too much for Colorado Springs because most of that was paid by a government grant. $1 million a piece. Now, don't fret. Now, Dougie, I got a quick Constitution question. You ready?
I think so.
Help me out because you know I'm slow on this. Where in the Constitution was the federal government granted the authority, the ability, the power to fund transportation in locality in a state?
It's right under climate change and education.
Thank you. Okay, so which is the code word on this show for it does not, that authority does not exist. Yeah. But hey, we'll do it anyway because we swore an oath when we took our office to protect and defend.
Well, it's for the general welfare and the community good.
That's not what general welfare meant.
Yeah, there's this funny veto we could read about that. But anyway, go ahead.
All right. And part of this is happening because of one of the companies that made them, or primarily made them, Proterra, filed for Chapter 11. And they apparently had about 40% of the market. So you buy something for $1.2 million. And we talked about the cost to operate and maintain.
They don't work, and the company that can fix them is gone.
Well, actually, it's coming back. Another company bought it.
Okay.
But there's the Philadelphia Tribune reported that another entity had a $24 million fleet of Proterra electric buses. Well, they're not working. They're not getting into the specifics why 25 buses were put on ice. But it could be they have issues that
put on ice.
Yeah, you get it? Pun intended. The upshot is these babies are not working. They're not lasting long. When it gets really cold, their batteries don't give them much range. And as New York City found out when they got the electric trash trucks that would also be used to push snow, they didn't work very well at all. So maybe Proterra under a new organization will come back, but they got a lot of fix. Any comments, gentlemen, before we move on?
Well, my first question goes back from other discussions we've had, and Brady's kind of touched on this before too, is when they do get them fixed or bring them back or whatever they decide to do, Is the insurance company going to cover them?
Don't know. Don't know.
Just a thought.
Well, the insurance company's more than happy to cover them, Doug. They're just going to charge twice as much as they would for a gas guzzler. Yeah.
Nice.
And that's actually the case.
And I imagine the cost to recycle or just trash these huge vehicles, it's not much damage to the environment, right?
Of course not.
Good. Okay, let's keep going, EV. There's this thing going on, and it gets me that we get a rule out of the Department of Labor. Now, I'm sorry, we're going to have to back up a little bit more. Where in the Constitution, as amended, was the federal government given the authority, the power, the responsibility, the duty to create a Department of Labor?
Right there, under the one that gives them the authority to create the Department of Education.
Okay, good. All right. So we're solid on that.
In other words, once again, it doesn't exist.
Thank you. Well, for the thing that has no power to exist, apparently it has created a rule. Of course you're going to do that, right?
Well, yeah, because we got to regulate.
You just gotta. And of course, this is for the general welfare, the good of the people, because they wouldn't do anything other than that.
And don't forget the Commerce Clause.
Oh, well, trust me, this is all about commerce. And the rule, which is supposed to take effect on March 11th, has to do with restricting the right to work as an independent contractor instead of being an employee.
Well, wait a second. Didn't California try to do that?
You mean AB 5?
Yeah, and it was disastrous, and it still is disastrous. It actually knocked me out of doing a television show.
Yes, AB 5, which
Truck drivers really hate it.
Which came into effect in January of 2020. The state, California, now exempts. They put the law in, but now they exempt more than 100 professions. Because, this idea of telling people you have to work as an employee, not an independent contractor, because you have to be protected for this and that because you are too dumb, stupid, and ignorant to do it right for yourself.
We got to make sure you get health insurance.
Right. Because we have to control you. It's just horrendous. One person directly hurt by AB 5, which is similar to what the Department of Labor that has no right to exist wants to put a rule out on, or has, effective March 11th. She was a stay-at-home mom, started her own floral business. She hired friends, fellow moms who wanted some flexible work hours. She worked for weddings, etc. And then AB 5 came. She was unable to hire contract labor, including people to help fill in when she was battling cancer. Thank you, AB 5. You really know how to take care of people. Brady, any thoughts?
Well, I'm still stuck on the previous topic. Just the word Solyndra just keeps popping up in my head.
Well, share with us a bit.
Well, we've all got an issue apparently with centralized planning, one size fits all government, where they decide that, oh, this sounds like a great idea. We'll just throw a bunch of money at it and not let markets, determine what consumers actually want. And the results are very predictable, time after time after time. There are no exceptions to this rule. There's nothing that big government does well that can't be handled better locally.
Yeah, but do they know that?
They don't care. It's all about power.
They just haven't tried true socialism yet, Alan. They'll get it right this time.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
I think it's been tried, and how well is it doing?
Every time it's been tried, it has failed.
We'll get it right the next time.
Yeah, it's like the political cartoon you've heard me talk about the guy sticking the fork in the light socket or the electrical socket, and the guy taps him on the shoulder and says, "Hey, The last that guy did that got hurt, and he says, yeah, but he didn't. That's because he didn't do it right.
Well, that's really what it comes down to is these woke or big government or Fabian socialist ideas that have been going on for 150 years. They sound really good with all their flowery descriptions of what they're trying to do. But top-down government will never work. You're going to hurt the people that you claim to be representing. And somehow there's always somebody, behind those bills, the monetary people who end up making a bundle of money and are never held accountable. Maybe one of these days we're going to learn to just make everything local and let the markets take care of things. The same lesson.
Well, that ties into the second topic too. Same thing when it comes to contractors and things like that. What it does, because I used to drive a big rig, I'm very familiar with the damage that AB5 did. Is what it did was it required truckers to either join a big company and become an employee, or leave the state or go out of business. And when it came to owner operators, I mean, ultimately that's what it was doing. What it did was it eliminated competition for the large corporations, gave them more employees. But they say they're for the little guy. They're not there for the little guy. Every time you go against the free market, you screw the little guy. You screw the owner operator and the small business owner. So, so they sit there and they complain about big corporations, but then they give them a nice big, slice of cake every time that they do this crap.
How many independent contractors in all the different professions actively promoted AB5? Do you know?
Didn't hear of any.
Point made. The other is that if something is going to work, and it's been tried over and over again by many, many different people in many, many different countries, and it continues to fail, at one point in time, do you finally get to the idea, the concept, this won't work?
Well, the thing is, the goal is to destroy the middle class. That ultimately, that's what it is. Because once you destroy the middle class, then it goes back to what it was before America became a country. The nobles and the peasants. That's what they want to get it back to. When I say they, I mean the general elitist out there, the attitude, whatever. How dare someone work really hard and then think they can sit at the same table as someone who is a part of the elite? Go back to being a peasant and shut up.
You mean what Klaus Schwab said? You'll own nothing and you'll be happy?
But I don't understand that, Alan. I'm already happy and I own a few things. Why can't I have both?
I'm sorry.
Because it's not good for the environment.
You just don't understand what you need to understand, and I will continue to explain it to you until you do.
All right, it's going to take. I hope you got a lot of patience because I'm really hard-headed, thick-headed sometimes, Alan. I'm just
definitely today. This is. Well, it's not happy news. UPS, United Parcel Service, apparently, before I get into this, have you noticed, it's been in the news lately, that some major retailers across the country are closing stores?
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely.
And of course, that means those people have no jobs anymore. The other thing is UPS. We all know UPS. It's been around forever. United Parcel Service. Apparently, it's exploring its options to cut up to 12,000 jobs. Some people think that UPS is seen as a bellwether for the global economy. It does well. The global economy is doing well. It's looking bad. Its volumes are down. Its revenues are down. That means something's wrong. That's a big bunch of people, isn't it? Have you heard anything about this?
Mm-hmm. So a lot of companies that are shutting down shop. A lot of fast food joints and restaurants are leaving California because they can't afford the minimum wage for all that anymore. And the federal government thinks it's such a good idea, they want to do the same thing.
I think some of the restaurants have been closing down just because it hasn't been safe for their workers.
There's that too. Well, those are in the city areas and all that.
Right.
Yeah. And because everybody knows that, a free market is dangerous. And so we've got to control everything. We've got to raise the minimum. It's funny because the very people that were screaming for a higher minimum wage are now the ones that are in the unemployment line. Just saying.
Yeah.
But don't worry. Don't worry. An automated system will take care of your job for you.
Yeah, that's why should that be scary at all?
Yeah.
Brady, any thoughts?
Yeah, I've got some economic thoughts. Just the other day, we got some economic statistics came out of our wonderful Bureau of Labor Statistics and other related entities. And they painted this rosy picture that Bidenomics is working just fine. And Wall Street celebrated. But I'm here to tell you that's perhaps not necessarily the case. If you look at the job surveys, you have the establishment survey and the household survey. The establishment survey allows for some double counting. So generally speaking, they correlate with each other. But right now, the gap between the two is the widest it's ever been in history. So you can't trust the employment data. More unemployment. They showed a gain in jobs for December, I think it was, the month we're looking at. However, if you take out government jobs and healthcare related, which is government subsidized jobs, we lost jobs. Give you another statistic. Full-time jobs lost over 60,000 jobs, but part-time jobs gained 90,000. Is that is that a healthy economy? There's more.
Keep going.
Oh, it sounds like you're describing the Carter administration. Anyway, go ahead.
Well, that's a great observation, Doug, because it's similar in a lot of ways. We're probably not going to see inflation reach the Carter level for a number of reasons, but it's also because we've got a bunch of deflationary factors because of commercial real estate, and that's a 2-hour show all on its own. What else do we have here? Prices are still rising faster than weekly earnings. Number of hours worked is going down, the average work week. The number of jobs going to foreign-born workers are at an all-time high.
When you say that, is it out of country?
Yeah, people not born in America.
No, but are the jobs going offshore?
No, these are people working in America. The jobs are going to people not born in America or not citizens.
Okay.
And of course, the real unemployment rates and inflation rates are a lot different, but I can pull those charts out anytime you want. But there's a lot of these statistics. Oh, and my favorite was GDP numbers, unemployment, and a handful of other numbers got revised for 2023. Every number but December got revised downward just last week. So all the things you thought was a shaky economy last year are actually worse than was reported. For some reason, all the corrections went the same direction once again.
And do you know who made those corrections?
The same people who put out statistics in the first place. We're talking Bureau of Labor Statistics.
They always do this. They give you one set for the newspapers and First Thought, and then they secretly revise them later, but nobody notices except for people who pay attention. And that way you really don't know how bad it truly is.
Yeah, what should blow you away is there's some pretty smart people in my former industry, Wall Street, who's, they make a living trying to predict which direction economic numbers are going to go. And they study this stuff. And yet they will trade based on the headline number, knowing that the herd will follow the headline number, even though they know it's fake. And they'll hedge their bets later on.
Their personal bets.
Yeah. Well, it's one thing if I know that the unemployment is much worse than expected, and so that means that's going to affect how the Federal Reserve, treats inflation or raises the rates. If there was a rational market, I would bet that direction. But instead, I place my bets based on the headline number, knowing the herd is going to follow the headline and it'll correct itself later. That's problematic. It's an inefficient market.
Crazy stuff. I just one. I think it's from last week, but I just thought I'd throw it in. Apparently, Anchorage, which is in Alaska, has had more than 100 inches of snow already, which is kind of amusing until you get to the part that, well, schools are closing, and we're talking about something that will weigh 30 pounds per square foot. Roofs don't do well. They're not made to support this kind of weight. It may get up to over 130 inches in this year. You guys hear anything about that?
Yeah, so 100 inches of global warming has fallen from the sky in Alaska.
Exactly. Here is some wackadoodle news, good news. You ready? I was really happy to see.
Always ready for good news.
Okay. Remember how those in power were going to come and get our gas stoves? Right? Well, apparently the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commissioner, Richard Trumka Jr., has suggested that, well, this is back in 2023, he suggested that the gas stoves could be banned. Well, on Monday, Department of Energy, that's one of those departments listed in the Constitution, announced that the new energy efficiency standards for ovens and stoves, almost all current stoves and ovens on the market already meet the standards. So we get to keep them. Somehow, apparently they now revised the energy standards. Crazy. And for those who don't, the manufacturers have until January 2028 to get in line. Have you heard anything about that?
I'm just excited because tortillas don't heat right on electric stoves.
Exactly.
So today I heard the first time I've actually heard a rational reason to go to an electric stove instead of gas.
Okay.
And it's pretty fascinating. I was in a almost 300-year-old house earlier today that had with an antique collector with a lot of silver up there. And apparently, I asked the question, how often do you have to polish the silver? Well, it turns out, and I thought because this house is relatively close to the ocean, the salt was probably part of the problem. Turns out that's not the case. It's actually the emissions from a gas stove cause silver to tarnish much more quickly. So the owner of their house actually, at the advice of somebody who's some kind of a biologist or a chemist, switched to an electric stove. And I made the comment, I go, it's the first good argument I've ever heard for electric over gas. So there actually is one reason, if you've got a bunch of silver in your house, you should go ahead and follow DC's advice. If not, keep your darn gas stove.
My place up there in the woods and on the Oregon coast, we have electric stove, but that's because you just can't get natural gas up there in the woods. I could go get a propane tank and fill it up once a year or twice a year or whatever, but too expensive, too much of a hassle. So I just go with the electricity up there. So that one is not because of one's better than the other, but simply because one is available and the other really isn't.
Well, it's nice to have the option versus being told what to do.
True enough.
And it's, again, the reasons for demanding the change. But what is just off, but what gets me is, the people out there, they want all of this done by a certain date. The vehicles, the stoves, the ovens.
Because government knows best.
The water heaters, everything. Okay, we're going electric. What I want to know, and I have not seen the calculation, how much more electricity has to be made available through the grid or expand the grid so we can have all of this use without having brownouts? Have you seen that calculation?
I'm going to say no, but we already have brownouts here in Southern California without everybody plugging in cars and having electric stoves.
That's my point. Brady, you heard of any of this?
I've heard a bit. I got a question for Doug that's sort of on topic.
Please do.
How's your high-speed internet up there in Oregon in the sticks?
My phone is faster than what we can get up there.
Well, I got good news for you. Joe Biden's got your back because he cares. I don't know if you all have heard about this one because it's a very similar topic, I think, is
Joe Biden's got my back. I'm already nervous because usually if a Democrat has anything to do with my back, it's usually because they're putting a knife into it. But anyway, go ahead.
Well, Elon Musk had negotiated a deal where he was going to expand. Apparently, it's a big deal for rural areas. They must have high-speed internet. It is a constitutional right, apparently. This has become a huge mission. These people that live off the grid.
Which section is that in?
It's necessary and proper, obviously.
Yeah, well, and don't forget general welfare.
Yeah, and of course, people who live off the grid absolutely need their high-speed internet, Doug. So Joe Biden is looking out for you.
Yeah.
But they basically broke their contract with Elon Musk's Starlink because he was going to make the Starlink available. It would cost about $500 per consumer to purchase the Starlink, whatever satellite receptor. And they said you're not going to be able to do it a year before they had to be able to prove it. And they instead went forward with a plan to build a bunch of fiber optic cable to every nook and cranny in the rural areas of America at a cost of $16,000 per consumer. As opposed
How
to
much? How much?
Consumer. 16 grand per consumer.
Who paid it?
You did, Alan. That was you.
Actually, technically, it wasn't me. It was the issuance of treasuries that paid it.
Anyways, Doug, enjoy your high-speed internet. I'm sure it'll be done sometime in the next 20 years.
Well, that said, and I have it on a pretty good resource, and this is not supposed to be public just yet, but since it got brought up, I'm going to say this. And maybe it is public by now, but I heard about it a little while back from someone who's in the industry. That Elon Musk is now making a deal with one of the private carriers in order to have the Starlink and this private carrier work together to make lots of money getting internet out to places where it isn't readily available. And the thing is, as much as T-Mobile is the company, but the thing is, when it comes to Starlink, as awesome as it is, it's still not as fast as broadband and Fios yet. Maybe it will be someday. But it is faster than what they have now. One of the major providers for internet in places where they don't have it is HughesNet. And like I said, my phone with a poor signal is faster. So.
Cool. Well, I'm glad you've got something.
Well, in my case, what I plan to do once I am a full-time resider up there, if I don't have high-speed internet at the house, is I'm going to try to get myself an office down in town. And that way I go down there when I need to do my internet stuff and then go back up to the house. If I don't have high-speed internet at the house, so I'm going to try to get myself I hear an echo in town.
Me too.
That way I go down there when I need to do my internet stuff and then go back up to the house and have high-speed internet at the house. So I'm going to try to get myself I hear an echo in town.
Me too.
Yeah, I don't know where that echo's coming from.
That's not me.
It can't be me.
I've got a bunch of windows open, but hopefully I fixed it just now.
All right,
Doug.
Yeah,
no worries.
Stopped.
But Doug, what you were saying was so important. I needed to hear it twice. So
At least. All right, something different. I heard this the other day, and I thought, well, I got to look this up because maybe I don't know. You gentlemen are familiar with the Mayflower Compact?
Yes.
Okay. And apparently, was about creating a democracy.
Really?
Therefore, I decided, look, I've never read the Mayflower Compact that I can remember. And I thought, well, I'm going to look this up. And I seem to have gotten a copy from a very legitimate source, conspiracytheorist.org. And I thought today I would read this. All right. Keep in mind, there were 41 signatures on this. Some of the names you know, some of them you would never know. Anyway, and it's surprisingly very short. I'd like to read it, and then I'd like your comments. You ready?
Fire away.
Ready?
Born ready.
All right. The Mayflower Compact, agreement between the settlers at New Plymouth, 1620. In the name of God, amen. We whose names are underwritten, the loyal subjects of our dread sovereign Lord King James, by the grace of God of Great Britain, France, and Ireland, King Defender of the Faith. Having undertaken for the glory of God and the advancement of the Christian faith and honor of our king and country, a voyage to plant the first colony in the northern parts of Virginia, do by these presents solemnly and mutually, in the presence of God and one another, covenant and combine ourselves together into a civil body politic for our better ordering and preservation and furtherance of the ends of aforesaid, and by virtue hereof do enact, constitute, and frame such just and equal laws, ordinances, acts, constitutions, and offices from time to time, as shall be thought most meet and convenient for the general good of the colony, unto which we promise all due submission and obedience. In witness whereof, we have hereunto subscribed our names at Cape Cod, 11th of November, in the year of the reign of our sovereign Lord King James of England, France, and Ireland, and of Scotland, Anno Domini 1620.
Anno Domini, year of our Lord.
You ever read that or remember it?
I have read it. I have taught it. It just basically establishes an agreement because by going further north, they were outside the charter that was originally given to them for the northern edge of Virginia, the area which later would be called the Massachusetts Bay Colony. They went way north of that, what they were chartered for. So since they were outside their charter, their contract was null and void. So they decided they would create a new contract, the Mayflower Compact, that basically said, we're getting together, we're going to hang out together and work together, and we'll do it in God's name. That's all it really essentially says. Didn't establish exactly how the government would run per se, with some minor details is all. It's a great document. It is a good foundation for what was coming later. And it definitely provided a foundation of a godly base. All you separation of church and state people, quit throwing up and freaking out. And that's it. But did it establish democracy? No, not at all. And we got to remember, too, the Pilgrims were separatists. While they were Puritans, the Puritans were trying to appease the Church of England and get along with them. And the Pilgrims were Puritans that basically said, no, there's no working with these people. We need to separate and be on our own and completely away from all of that. They were separatists. And so the idea that they accidentally went way north away from everybody else, but they were separatists, I have trouble accepting, I believe, that was done on purpose. Once again, though, the document was established because they were outside the protection of the original charter. They had violated it by going too far north. They needed a new agreement. Later on, Britain would accept the Mayflower Compact and their own agreement as a new charter, but that's a story for later.
And how did Britain acquire the authority to issue?
Well, that's what's interesting about it, because technically that land was claimed by Spain. And Britain basically said, well, I know you guys claim it, but you aren't using it, so we're going to take it. So, I mean, that's essentially what happened. And Spain was like, fine, it's too cold and rocky up there anyway. You Brits like it cold and wet and horrible, so have it, kind of attitude. But then as the colony started heading southward and getting closer to, say, Florida, then tensions began. But that's a different discussion. But no, England had the authority because they said so, if that's to answer your question directly.
Oh, that's where we get all the federal departments. Got it.
Yeah, because they said so.
Yes. Brady, any thoughts?
Yeah, I do. And there's a comment in chat from Scott D12, who posted a link to YouTube about National Monument of the Forefathers. Kirk Cameron made a movie series. I think it was like 6 weeks, and I took the class last year. Doug remembers me talking about it, called Monumental, and it talked about this great monument there in Plymouth, and there's some great lessons. I was going to go visit that in person over the Christmas holidays, but I had to fly back to San Diego a couple weeks earlier. I'm only a couple-hour drive from there, and I do plan to visit it. It's a pretty awesome place from what the movie depicts. So if you guys want to scroll up and watch the little 3-minute video Scott D12 put in, it really talks about the story of the who the founders were, the settlers, the Pilgrims were. That monumental series that Kirk Cameron did was fantastic. You can probably get the DVD for like $20, and just look for Monumental Kirk Cameron. I highly recommend it. It gave me better insight into what these people went through to get here and why they did it. A bunch of these ships got delayed for years as the Brits tried to keep them from leaving. They were jailed, finally let out, had their homes confiscated. It's a phenomenal series about American history. And Doug, I know you remember me talking about it. Alan, I don't think we have, but highly recommend it. It's a great job, Scott D. I highly recommend that.
I've actually been meaning to watch it myself because as much as I think I know, I have a feeling I'll learn a lot from it. And I am a huge fan of Kirk Cameron and his work. So,
isn't it time he interviewed us? Yeah.
Well, originally my thought was I wanted to interview him. That's an interesting twist in the whole idea, but
why don't you get in contact with him and get that arranged?
Yeah, I've been trying to get in contact with him for years. It hasn't worked out yet.
Keep going. Keep going.
Yeah, we'll get there.
What's interesting is there's the document I received had the names of the 41 signers. Some names our history has made familiar to us. One is William Bradford. Another is Miles Standish.
John Carver is on there too.
Yes, he's the top.
Yeah, well, he's the first governor, and then Bradford being the second governor of Plymouth, and then Miles Standish kind of being their military guy.
But the one that really stood out and surprised me was the name John Goodman. I didn't know he was that old. It's just amazing. But, he goes back that far.
And did you look on the list for Roseanne?
No, I did not. No, we're going to let that go. And I think she came on the next one.
Yeah, she was on the following trip. Yeah, that's it.
All right. So, gentlemen, now we're going to get into the real stuff. One of the topics I wanted to touch on, and I've mentioned this to both of you, and I know you all have topics, but I'd like to start out with this one. Is that okay with you?
Well, it's your show. You do
Unless
what you
there's
want.
something you really, really want to get started on.
No, have fun with it. I mean, I'm just enjoying the chat room. I've got a dancing robot from Futurama going on, and
Okay. Oh, before we get going, anything in chat that we want to talk about?
yeah, there's a dancing robot from Futurama.
Okay, I'm going to ask again, Brady. Is there anything we want to talk about in chat?
No, a bunch of cool comments about Plymouth Rock, etc. Over in Vaughn chat, I've been corrected. It was not Crafty Fox is correcting me. The article I linked did not say $16,000 per home. It said about 5,000 or 6,000 per home.
Oh, okay.
16,000 homes in North Carolina that we're going to spend some $80 million on. I'm not in the mood to do math tonight, but thank you for the correction, Crafty Fox.
All right.
I'd rather be accurate.
Exactly.
So,
well, let's talk about.
One more reason to vote for Joe Biden.
Yeah, thank you for that. All right, let's go on to something that is, I think, very important because we hear about it, or I hear about it, and it's time to have a little discussion. And the topic is maritime law. Now, I'm going to take the position that I am totally ignorant of this, and I want to be educated, which means you both are going to start talking about it, and I'm going to ask the questions. So, Douglas, I think you've been down this road a few times, correct?
Well, actually, I've been down that river a few times.
Or body of water?
That shoreline.
Would you prefer body of water?
No, yes. We go with that.
Okay. Maritime law. Is this the supreme law of the land?
That's the supreme law of the sea, apparently.
Well, maritime law is authorized by the Constitution to the federal government because it belongs to no state. Maritime waters are basically waters that are used for commercial activity, typically with other countries. So you would basically put in there oceans, gulfs, tributaries that are connected to the ocean, things like that. Maritime law is not to be confused with other things. I know where this is going, but we'll get there when we get there.
Is there some place in particular in the Constitution that's mentioned?
Yeah, it's in a second. Let me.
Well, I've got
our article. Go ahead.
Well, I've got a place that supersedes the Constitution. The United Nations created something called the International Maritime Organization, and they codified maritime law.
So in Article 3, Section 2, the judicial power shall extend to all cases in law and equity arising under this Constitution, the laws of the United States, and treaties made and of which shall be made under their authority to all cases affecting ambassadors, other public ministers, consuls, to all cases of admiralty and maritime jurisdiction, to controversies to which the United States shall be a party. Now, because admiralty and maritime is lumped together, there is an understanding that they go together, and they do typically, but not admiralty courts. Admiralty courts is different than admiralty and maritime law, and that's where sometimes the confusion arises. Maritime law is law of the, and admiralty law is law of the ocean, and once again, commercial trading and all of that jazz. Admiralty courts, however, are a different animal. Admiralty courts was something that the British used against the colonists in Massachusetts when they kept acting up. And Admiralty.
Wait a minute. Just so we're clear on this. Sorry for interrupting. Acting up means what? They wouldn't go to bed at the appropriate time?
They were being disobedient to the elitist rule. What was happening was there were protests going on and smuggling going on, and John Hancock was one of the star smugglers, as a matter of fact. And so you have and smuggling going on, and you have disobedience to the writs of assistance, which were in place because of all the smuggling. And so what would happen is a colonist then would be taken to court And the judge, which was a local, while appointed by the British, was one of the local people, a colonist. And the jury was chosen among the colonists, and they would find the colonists, well, not guilty.
Innocent.
And so once they found that colonists not guilty and the British government wasn't getting the narrative or the verdicts that they wanted, they decided to instill admiralty courts. An admiralty court is where you yank the local judge and you put in a British judge and you don't allow juries anymore. And that's what they began to impose on the colonists. Admiralty courts have not been used in the United States since we have become a country, although there is a lot of rumors and theories that they have been. Now, that said, I wouldn't put it beneath the enemy to put them in place. So when we start talking maritime law and admiralty courts, they are actually two different animals. Then out of that comes then the other idea of the fringe on the flag. Well, that proves that we're under maritime law because they got the fringe on the flag in the courtrooms. No, a fringe on the flag is simply decorating the flag real nice in its dress uniform, or at least that's the way the Army essentially put it during the 1880s. And it eventually did get accepted as a dressed up version of a flag that's accepted, and they tend to put the fringe on the flag as a dressed up flag. It's in its dress uniform, so to speak, in official places such as a courtroom. As for the Bar Association is now being brought up in the chat room, British Accreditation Registry is what people have said. That has never actually been true. That is not what it stands for. The word bar, according to Blackstone, is because there was a bar that existed between the audience and the judge, but that's actually not true either. Where the word bar comes from with Bar Association is a bunch of lawyers are barristers. An association of lawyers is an association of barristers or a bar association. That's where that comes from.
So Doug, real quick, we're looking at the chat. We had another one out there. LAW, law, stands for land, air, water.
Yeah, I've not heard that one before.
Yeah, I don't think that's accurate either.
I don't think so either.
That's one of the word games. No, what's interesting about this conversation, and Alan and I talked about this a little briefly earlier today, is, who were the people that created maritime laws in the first place? They were the maritime empires. This goes back, and I've talked about this when I talk about who really runs the world. You had the Carthaginians had, controlled all the trade in the Mediterranean until the backwater republic known as Rome finally beat them. The Roman Empire had 1,000 years of being the dominant, and they installed laws that favored their ability to trade. And when Rome fell, that power of maritime dominance went to Constantinople, the Byzantine Empire, and then eventually to Venice. Well, the Venetians had a maritime empire, from a city-state, and they had all kinds of laws, and it had to, that's how they were able to enforce their power to create mercantile trade. That went to the Dutch, and then eventually when the Venetians intermarried all the way to England, when they became the empire where the sun never sets, is really about the British Empire, which was from the 1600s on all about protecting British trade. And that's where these maritime laws come from in the first place. So you can't have this conversation without understanding the source. It was about protecting their own mercantilist interests. I think it's an important point. I've got I looked up, a definition of maritime law, and I found a pretty good one. It is also known as admiralty law. It's a body of laws, conventions, and treaties that govern private maritime business and other nautical matters, such as shipping or offenses occurring on open water, meaning it has no jurisdiction on land.
Right. And like I said earlier, it has to do with commercial movement and all that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So does it?
And I bring it up because, if you're a private boat in the 16, 17, 1800s, and you decide to engage in piracy, you are a pirate and you're breaking maritime law.
Right.
But if you are given a letter of marque by some sovereign, you are now, what's the word we use? A privateer, and piracy now becomes legal.
Yeah.
So most of these laws were about making their pirates legal and other people's pirates illegal.
Yeah.
And
And he who controls the seas controls the world.
what was Sir Francis Drake? Was he a pirate?
He was a privateer for Britain, and he also did a lot of stuff on the West Coast. Matter of fact, if you go into San Rafael, there's a street, major avenue, boulevard named after him. But anyway, yeah, so you've got John Cabot, which was the British explorer that kind of hit the north end of the Atlantic coast, and there was Drake, who, while he did handle some of the Atlantic area, he's the one who went all the way over to the Pacific too. But he was known for attacking Spanish ships and stealing their booty. But he did it for the British Empire, so it was totally legal.
And by being a thief,
Yeah, he was a legal thief for the British Empire.
he earned knighthood.
Right. Because he's such a patriot, being a legal thief.
Yeah. He did the queen or the king's bidding.
Pretty much.
Now, when we talk about maritime law being for the open waters, would that include like a big lake?
Well, typically not. Typically, it's going to be commercial waters that are able to be used for commercial purposes that are typically connected to the ocean, because maritime law is going to apply in what would be waters that could or would be used by international traders, traders traders, not the other kind.
And the flag, which is decked out with the gold fringe, that's an indoor flag, isn't it?
Typically, yeah.
Not an outdoor.
Well, it has been used outdoor for things such as marches by the army and things like that, but it's not necessarily a maritime flag, no.
It's a display flag, indoor flag. It's not something that you would fly from a flagpole.
Like I said, in layman's terms, it is a flag in its dress uniform.
Right. Excellent. Thank you. I wanted to kind of get through that. And we touched on Admiralty Court, which has a history to the monarchy, but apparently it was not considered favorable by the founders, which meant after each colony became a separate state, did they continue with the Admiralty courts?
No, it was seen as a type of tyranny. It eliminated jury trial. Jury trial, especially under the Saxon customs, was a big deal.
Well, if you don't have a jury trial, then how can you be judged by your peers? You can't.
Well,
excellent.
Another interesting argument is any of the older Admiralty laws were superseded if we assume that the IMO, International Maritime Organization treaties proposed to the United Nations, put into place through various compacts in 1948 and went into effect in 1958. Let me just read this. Maritime law now governs many of the insurance claims relating to ships and cargo, civil matters between ship owners, seamen, and passengers, and piracy. Additionally, maritime law regulates registration, license, and inspection procedures for ships and shipping contracts, maritime insurance, and the carriage of goods and passengers. All of the maritime laws that are currently considered to be in effect have nothing to do with the maritime law as it's being applied in a certain theory you're hinting at. This would have superseded it, and in no way, shape, or form does it have any ability to override what happens in the continental or domestic United States.
Correct.
It does not rule over that. I'm trying to remember the number, but international water started, what is it, 10 miles off every nation's shore? Is that right, 10 miles?
Could look it up.
Off the top of my head, I thought it was further out than that, but
yeah,
all I know is when I was in the Navy, once we got into international waters, we didn't have to pay sales tax, and so everybody waited to buy the cigarettes from the ship store after we got so far out.
We should have to pay sales tax in the first place, but that's another story. Yeah, I learned that with scuba diving and salvage. We were supposed to know that stuff, and I forgot the exact amount of miles. But no way, shape, or form do maritime laws ever apply to, and it does not apply to river and lakes.
How about streams?
No,
Well, once again, the area that's near the ocean may, but where the commercial interest is going on, private interest, but for the most part it doesn't, because a river belongs to a particular country, and maritime law typically is for areas that are used internationally.
Some of the more nonsensical theories about applying maritime law to the United States has to do with the Postmaster General. I don't know if you've gone down into those crazy rabbit holes, but they're trying to assume that they're playing the typical word games of saying that post offices create a port or something along those lines. It's been a couple of years since I read that, but they are playing those games, and no, they absolutely do not.
All right, I looked this up. I looked this up, and thank you, Google. One says once a vessel is in waters that are more than 24 miles off the coast of the country, they are considered to be on the high seas. Okay?
How far?
24 miles.
Well, see, it depends on the country, because it's.
Wait a minute. Hold. Let me finish.
Okay.
Then the next one is the rule of the 3-mile limit of territorial waters, while subject to certain exceptions, is in respect to strictly national problems, may safely be considered. Then another one says the international waters generally extends about 200 nautical miles from the shore of a country. Okay. And then another one says 12 nautical miles. There you go.
Well, typically within 230 miles or 200 nautical miles is considered within the influence, realm of influence of a country. But most countries, it's right around a dozen nautical miles offshore before you get into international waters. The United States, from Navy days, I believe it's about 25 miles off the coast. But once again, you have I'm trying to remember the proper term, but the influence is up to 200 miles.
And then, of course, you want to know how far it is, which means that's when the passengers can start gambling.
Yeah, there's that too.
Yeah. All right. Enough with that. Thank you for sharing on maritime law, Admiralty Court. Good to know.
Alan,
Yes.
Alan, I found one more little tidbit that needs to be shared. So it turns out that the history of maritime law can be traced all the way back to ancient Egypt. In those days, ships were used to transport goods, and a clearly defined set of rules was needed to ensure safety and fair trade and settle disputes between different parties. However, it wasn't until much later that the first written record of formal codes can be found. The Rhodian Sea Laws, formed between 900 and 300 BC, set official rules for the Mediterranean Sea. These laws governed seafaring trade in the area, influenced the Romans, and remained in effect for a very long time. Once again, the Carthaginians. So that is your history.
But think about that. We're talking about going back almost 3,000 years. You're going back to 900 BCE. You're going back almost 3,000 years. You've got people in boats on a big inland sea, Mediterranean, actively trading, and they want to do it right enough that they create a rule book. That I kind of like that.
Well, we want everybody to get along. Or
at least know this is what you can do, this is what you can't do.
Right.
Behave yourself, and we won't have problems.
And then Bill West just put in the chat what I already read, but it's a reminder, Article 3, Section 2. The Constitution gives the courts federal jurisdiction over admiralty and maritime cases. But
let me read 2 more paragraphs of this history of maritime law. I think that they'll tie into what you just said, Doug. European maritime laws gradually evolved over the following centuries. That was after the Mediterranean stuff. Key developments that helped to shape current laws included the Consulate of the Sea, the roles of Orleron, and the early English Admiralty laws, which would later help shape the laws of the seas in the U.S. Here's the key part. Maritime law arrived in the U.S. in the 1600s. However, it wasn't until 1789 that federal district courts were given jurisdiction over admiralty law cases and a uniform body of law was created. That would have been the same year the Constitution got ratified, was it not?
That's the same day. You said 1789?
I did.
That's the year it went into operation. It was ratified in 88, but it went into operation in 89.
Thank you.
I want to make one comment on Article 3, Section 2 that Doug had previously mentioned. And you get into it. To all cases of admiralty and maritime jurisdiction. Yeah. That means they're differentiating the two.
I don't know the differentiation reason, no.
But it's just that if you said this and that, well, this and that aren't the same. That's why you got an and there. But they're both being included, which means they're not exactly the same.
They're not synonymous per se, exactly. Well, and that happens in the Constitution a few times because there might be just a small distinct difference. And two good examples is in the preamble where it says ordain and establish. Well, to ordain something is to establish it. So they essentially mean the same thing, but ordain also means with God's approval, essentially. Or you get into Article 1, Section 1, where it says all legislative power shall be herein granted, shall be vested. Granted and vested both means to grant, to legally transfer, but vested also goes beyond granted in meaning exclusionary and irrevocable. So admiralty and maritime, and I don't know because I haven't spent a whole lot of time studying that differentiation there, but I'm going to guess there is a subtle difference between the two like that.
I'll make one comment and we'll move on. Granted, invested, I see the need for both of them. Mm-hmm. Granted makes it clear federal government is the recipient of something that it did not have until it was given or granted, which I like. Vested is, I'm giving this to you, you're going to keep it. It's yours, permanent. That's it. This isn't something you can pass on to someone else because it got vested in you.
Right.
So to me, those two words going together are significant because it discusses the source and it discusses the nature of permanency. That I like. All right. So we've had wackadoodle news. We've had maritime stuff. Brady, I think you had at least one topic to chat about that we mentioned.
I got a couple, but I got a fun story from today I wanted to share first.
Okay.
Now, this is something that just happened a few hours before the show. Hang on a second. I got to find Doug and Alan. Yes, are you familiar with a Native American gentleman by the name of Red Jacket?
Red Jacket?
I cannot say that I am.
So he was an Iroquois. He was around from 1758 to 1830. He was a Seneca tribal commander.
Okay.
Lent support to the British during the Revolutionary War. And he also fought to prevent conversions to Christianity among the Iroquois. He was more of a politician than a warrior back in the day.
Sounds like Joseph Brant.
Yeah. Well,
same type of guy. But anyway, go ahead.
Whether you like him or not, he was, doing the best he could for his people. But General George Washington, at the point after the war, ended up having a big ceremony of peace with him and handed him a very ornate gilded rifle. And there's a big ceremony and there's books about this. I held that rifle in my hands not 3 hours ago.
Very cool.
Part of a private collection of the gentleman whose house I was at tonight, and it was one of the coolest things I've ever seen. So I'm going to read all about Red Jacket and tell you more about him. But that was
And
pretty.
it's somebody I should be familiar with. I'm kind of mad at myself that I'm not.
I'd never heard of him until today.
Okay.
So I can't, don't feel bad about it. But it was a really cool thing that just happened, and it's the real deal. It was a flintlock musket, everything, all carved, all engraved, everything. It's part of a really neat collection of about 200 firearms from that time period this gentleman had in his collection.
Wow.
One of the cooler things I've ever done.
Very, very nice.
Yeah,
All right. Topic.
Oh, give me a second. I'm just coming down off my high from that. I got a couple. You want to go on to the next one while I dig up my notes again?
Dougie, what do you got?
Oh, what do I got? Okay, how about this one? Headline, Infowars.com, by the way. Democrats propose bill to effectively ban militias. So I've been arguing make the militia great again, and they're saying make the militia not exist. The Democrats, Senator Ed Markey and Representative Jamie Raskin, introduced the Preventing Private Paramilitary Activity Act on the anniversary of January 6th.
This is out of D.C., correct?
Right. We have Senator Ed Markey, who's a real piece of work. He goes way back. And Representative Raskin from the House of Representatives, Democrat from Maryland, who is a piece of work too, but not as well known as Markey. And the bill seeks to limit most militia activity, creating criminal penalties for people who engage in certain conduct, including intimidating elected officials, interfering with government proceedings, and pretending to be law enforcement. 2 out of 3 being, part of the First Amendment. That's beside the point. Markey claimed the bill will prevent another January 6th incident while citing fake news about the events that transpired. Here's Markey's quote in a news release. 3 years ago, white supremacists affiliated with paramilitary organizations stormed the U.S. Capitol, shattering windows, walls, and the families of 5 U.S. Capitol police officers. Except that none of the U.S. Capitol police officers died on the scene or as a direct result of any violence that was allegedly committed on the grounds. But that's beside the point. Private paramilitary actors such as the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers pose a serious threat to democracy. I thought you would like that, Alan. And the rule of law. Well, if you have democracy and the rule of law typically is a republic, they're confused. And we must create new prohibitions on their unauthorized activities. How dare you act in a manner the government didn't approve of, that interfere with the exercise of people's constitutional rights, never mind God-given rights. The forces of bigotry, hatred, and violent extremism must be stopped. Are you ready? Are you sitting down? For the sake of our democracy. Raskin claimed militia groups used political violence to intimidate people and threaten democracy. Our legislation makes the obvious but essential clarification that these domestic extremist paramilitary operations are in no way protected by our Constitution. Have you read the Second Amendment, dude? I'm grateful to Senator Markey for his partnership on this critical effort to protect the rule of law. So they've already destroyed the First Amendment with January 6th, going after these guys. Did you know that all these January 6 people they've been arresting, they're being arrested for exercising their First Amendment enumerated rights? My friend Derek Kennison, who was found guilty of all charges, was there. He prayed.
He was found guilty?
On all charges. They're waiting in April for sentencing. So he prayed. There's your freedom of religion. He spoke out loud, freedom of speech. One of his friends was podcasting, freedom of the press. They peaceably assembled. They weren't violent. They showed up.
And weren't they on the other side of the Capitol?
Yeah, they were on the west side, the grass area. They never even went. They never touched the concrete or any of the steps or went inside.
And they were there an hour after?
About an hour after most of the hubbub happened, yeah. And petition government for redress grievances. First Amendment destroyed. Now we're going to go after the Second Amendment, and that's what this is all about. Because the whole point of the militias is to guard against these knuckleheads. The whole point of having active militias. Now, paramilitary, that's the term they're using. That's not what a militia is. I guess it sort of is. But a militia is a community defense force that is there to defend the community against tyranny.
Against what?
Well, because the military is going to defend against invaders. So what does that leave as a potential danger? Let me think about it. Government tyranny, maybe. So first, with January 6th trials and all this other stuff, they've stamped out the First Amendment. This is an attempt to stamp out the Second Amendment. They couldn't take your guns, so what they'll do is they'll make it illegal for you to form together with your guns as a militia.
Aren't they also going after the Sixth Amendment?
Well,
Speedy public trial?
Well, the Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth has been stomped all over for my entire lifetime. But yeah, with the January 6th, Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth, they're all being shredded up too. Absolutely. But don't worry. These dangerous militiamen who are very dangerous, like Enrique Tarrio, the Proud Boys leader, who was sentenced to 22 years of prison, who wasn't even present in Washington D.C. on January 6th.
What was he charged with?
Oh, all the things everybody else was, but
But he wasn't there.
But he's a dangerous militia leader, and he organized this white supremacy charge.
What's his name?
Organize it.
What's his name?
Enrique Tarrio. Yeah, he's obviously a white supremacist with a name like that, huh?
Got it.
So the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers, they're charged with none of them were charged with violent offenses on January 6th. Yet some were still sentenced with decades in prison.
And what were they found guilty of?
Paramilitary activity, I guess. I haven't looked at their list of charges, but their list of charges are probably as bogus as my friend Derek's, who interrupted an official meeting, even though the official meeting was over before he even got there, for example.
So, Doug, that interrupting an official meeting is something that's really interesting because Supreme Court's going to hear a challenge to that. It's the Section 1512, this warping of a Sarbanes-Oxley law that was basically in the wake of the Enron scandal 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. The Section 1512 was meant there to say, look, if you're obstructing an investigation into financial fraud, you are basically committing financial fraud.
Well, that's what they do. They take something that has nothing to do with it and they twist it to fit. I mean, that's what they did with Roe v. Wade, if you remember. Roe v. Wade was based on the right to privacy that was based on an economic financial case.
Yeah, here's where it gets fun. An awful lot of the charges of the J6 prisoners, God bless them all. Very few of them deserve to even spend a single day in jail. A lot of those charges are going to be tossed if the Supreme Court rules correctly on 1512 that this has been just a twisting of the reading of the law. I mean, this is lawfare at its best. Mm-hmm. They had to, when you have to create a creative interpretation of an existing law just to charge somebody, you're probably not working in the interest of justice.
But that's what lawyers do.
Yeah, well, that's what lawfare is. It's not what lawyers are supposed to do. It gets more interesting than that for those of us who've been paying attention to the news. People you should be watching on this story right now are Julie Kelly, Darren Beatty and the Revolver, and Dan Bongino. They're all over this story. And it's not about the break-in at the Capitol. It's about the planting of the pipe bombs. Now, the official story,
which is also a bunch of crap, but that's beside.
Yeah, but when this unravels, this takes down the entire story. Yeah. So I want to go into the recently revealed details, if I may.
Please do.
Go right ahead.
Yeah, well, the official story is that 17 hours prior to these pipe bombs being discovered, they have videotape of, somebody planting a pipe bomb, which was later found out to be never going to be active. It had a 1-hour egg timer on it that was started 40 minutes before and discovered 20 minutes before it was supposed to explode at exactly 1 p.m. Eastern, exactly when Congress was supposed to start hearing the
Which is also when the barriers were breached at the same time at 1 o'clock and 10 minutes before Trump was finished speaking.
Yeah, and here's a fun one. The barrier could not have been breached. They had a bunch of more bike barriers being scheduled to come in, but those barriers, the truck carrying those barriers got blocked because of the police shut down the area due to the pipe bombs. So that's one that's not talked about much. But more importantly, who is it that actually discovered the pipe bombs? Who was zooming in on the cameras? Who planted the bomb? The FBI has these people on video. The FBI had the license plate and the whatever free pass, whatever government credit card thing, and they were staking out the house of the person who allegedly planted the bomb 17 hours before. I don't think that happened, but they called off the surveillance of that person, and we don't know his name. Now, it gets interesting because Kamala Harris was apparently inside the DNC, and her secret security team did a scrub of the area beforehand. They couldn't find a pipe bomb that was sitting out in plain sight for 17 hours with dozens, a high trafficked area.
Not seeing the images. I mean, plain sight.
Yeah. And then, of course, when this person who discovered it, he walks directly over to a cop car, talks to people on both sides of the cop car, DC police, Capitol Police, and goes over to the Secret Service. And these people go out and start milling around like they're out for a Sunday stroll. Now, Dan Bongino accurately points out that we don't want them panicking. They're taught not to do that. But that being said, a bunch of school children walked right past this after it was discovered as a bomb, and they did nothing to prevent that. They didn't evacuate the soon-to-be Vice President of the United States. Kamala Harris has never discussed the fact that she was a victim, almost a victim of an assassination attempt. What was she doing at the DNC in the first place? And there's a second Secret Service detail there to protect someone she was meeting with, who had to be someone in Congress, which is either the Speaker of the House, Senate. There's only like 8 people that had that in the Congress that get Secret Service potential. So which one of those people was not at the Capitol during one of the most important jobs they ever do? And inquiring minds want to know. We don't know the name of the guy who discovered the bomb, who happens to be an off-duty Capitol Police person, a police officer. We don't have his name. Why not? Oh, and of course, the communications and the triangulation, all that stuff has mysteriously disappeared.
Right.
So yeah, we've got questions, and they're going to be answered.
Well, this is a lot of technological stuff that you can't expect the average person to keep track of. It's going to get lost.
Well, it points to the fact, and I'll give my opinion right now. January 6th was a setup. The reason they did that is they couldn't allow the election to be questioned. They were going to be questioned on the floor. When they reconvened Congress, it was under special session rules. So Nancy Pelosi did not allow any questions of the election or alternative electors to be even heard. And therefore, and this is the important part, when these states challenged the elections or the results over the next several weeks, the Supreme Court said you had no standing because those objections to the election were never brought forward officially. It was a legislative maneuver. It was a legal trick, and that's why J6 had to be pointed as an insurrection, just like after the Civil War, quote unquote Civil War, the war to prevent Southern independence. They had to call it an insurrection, and they had to put that into the 14th Amendment, because if it was legal to secede, there was no insurrection, and therefore Lincoln acted in an aggressive and imperialistic manner. It's exactly what they're doing on January 6th.
And also there's other evidence that's coming out too when it comes to the people that were involved with January 6th and the hearings, and the people from Hollywood actually that were brought in to sensationalize it and make it a better production. And in the end, that's what it was. And I said this yesterday on Constitution Radio on KMET 1490 AM. Thank you, Alan.
What's that stand for? What's that stand for?
Because it stands for America. But anyway, and like I said on the show yesterday when I was on KMET, this was from the beginning to the end a Hollywood production to make what they wanted you to see available to you so that you could see their narrative. period. It was a political stunt. It was a publicity stunt. It was a Hollywood production, and it was planned and orchestrated in a Hollywood manner. And I hate saying Hollywood, but that's the best way to get you to understand. It was, in no better way of saying it, fake. It was a production. And all of this was planned out. And in their best laid plans, there were mistakes, and we're discovering them. And that is creating a trail right back to what the truth is. And the truth is that it was all a lie.
Yeah, and just to make sure that this video never goes on YouTube, because I will not be uploading it because of this topic. They had to stage January 6th so they could cover up their steal of the 2020 election. What they did to us during COVID, which was also done to steal the election to get mail-in ballots, which was done to cover up because Trump had all the evidence of what they'd done during Russiagate and Spygate all the way back to 2016, which started with the alleged break-in of the hack of the DNC by apparently Russian people. But Julian Assange knows that didn't happen. He's got the evidence. He knew who leaked those emails, which is why he's been in prison the entire time. They're doing this to cover up crimes they keep committing to cover up previous crimes.
And it's like, if you, as a person, as a kid, you realize this. Once you lie, you got to tell a lie to cover the lie. Before you know it, you can't remember what's a lie and what isn't a lie. And the web gets so complicated, mistakes start being made.
Well, they have been made. You get an amateur researcher like myself can tell you every single thing they did just by paying attention and reading the right sources. The average person is going to know the truth, and the truth shall set us free. Question is, what body has the ability to ever persecute the people who perpetrated these crimes against this country? And the answer is nobody, unless Donald Trump wins.
Well, and there is one group, though, that could completely, resolve this if worse came to worse, and that would be the militia, which brings us back to the very beginning of this. That's why they are proposing a bill to try to ban the militias. They are covering their tracks, and they're making sure that nobody, and I mean nobody, can tear down their little house of cards. The problem is, not only do they have a house of cards, it's turning out a few of the decks of cards are missing.
Yeah. Okay. I'm glad you brought us back to that, Doug, because I brought this up on a video I did recently. Talking about the bill to get rid of the militia. On September the 10th, 2001, Donald Rumsfeld gave a speech talking about the need for the Department of Defense to start using more private contractors. Following day 9/11 happens. We entered the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the endless wars. By 2008, the Department of Defense was employing more private military contractors than they were enlisted personnel overseas. Now, these private contractors have done nothing but grow. I mean, Russia's got their own version of it, fighting in Ukraine. Private military contractors have done, it's a huge for-profit business. You get out of the military, you get your salary triples if you join one of these contractors. This bill does nothing to address the private contractors that the rich can employ to defend themselves. It's just you and I getting together and saying, hey, we want to defend our homeland. The private military contractors are not touched by that bill. I have a bit of an issue with that.
Well, the Democrats have always claimed they're for the little guy, but they really aren't. They're for the big guy, because the big guys are the ones that give them their money and their power.
This one's not about Democrat versus Republican. This is about the establishment versus us, because the Republicans are backing that bill too.
Yeah.
Question, Doug. Again, I'm slow on this, so if I read the Second Amendment, and I can read it, but I do read it slowly, where is the power given to the federal government to regulate militias?
Shall not be infringed means shall not be infringed. And it doesn't just apply to the right to keep and bear arms. It also applies to the idea of there being a well-regulated militia. It shall not be infringed. Their authority over a well-regulated militia, and well-regulated meaning in good order, a a militia that's in good order. It's well trained, it's well equipped, all of those things. They have no authority. Shall not be infringed means shall not be infringed.
Federal government has no
No authority
game,
whatsoever.
no game in this area.
Hmm.
But what's probably the biggest purpose of the Second Amendment?
To stop exactly what they're becoming.
Security of a free state.
Hmm.
And when they say that, they're not talking about the country, they're talking about the individual states.
Right. The free state, each of the states to be free from the tyranny of a federal government that has gone despotic. And that gets us to another topic that we have talked about before on this show. What is insurrection? Insurrection is when you go against a constitutional government. If the government is despotic, it's not insurrection, it's duty.
There you go.
There's a comment in chat I'd like to address.
Please.
Okay.
From Scott D12 again, dude's on fire tonight in this chat. Says Bill Benny, former national NSA, refuted the hack, in quotes, and instead described a thumb drive downloaded because of transfer speed. Yeah, I've read that too, and I think it's correct. What's interesting about the hack, the famous quote unquote hack of the DNC, is the FBI never investigated it. They didn't send their forensics teams out there. The team that did investigate it was from a private company called CrowdStrike. CrowdStrike claims to be a cybersecurity company. They're the ones who falsely attributed the Sony hack back, 7-8 years ago, and they've had other false attributions, such as in the earlier Ukraine conflict post 2014. They do not have a good track record. CrowdStrike is founded by two gentlemen in particular, Dmitry Alperovich, who's a Ukrainian. Notice the pattern here.
Mm-hmm.
Who also sits on the Atlantic Council, which is one of the more influential transatlantic think tanks, et cetera, similar to the Council of Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission. He also is a huge Hillary Clinton donor and supporter. The other person who helped co-found CrowdStrike is a guy by the name of Sean Henry. Well, Sean Henry is former FBI who worked directly under Bob Mueller and Jim Comey prior to going private with CrowdStrike. So I don't necessarily trust their findings, nor have they ever revealed them how they attributed it before, but their methodology has already been proven faulty in some of the biggest hacks in history. So the official story that Russia hacked, and I don't even want to go into the whole Guccifer nonsense because that's been debunked a dozen times over. That was the premise of the entire Russiagate, the FISA warrants, everything they did to undermine Donald Trump's administration, how the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence created a faux report that's already been debunked, 8 most powerful people in the Senate, all on board with this, Republicans, Democrats alike, using fake evidence and burying other stuff. I mean, that's how deep this rot goes. And you just got to keep unpeeling the layers of this onion, and you recognize that we're ruled by, well, use the term you want, but not people we want to be ruling over us.
Thank you for that, Brady. Doug, thank you for the topic. Appreciate it.
Thank
Brady,
you,
you
sir.
had a topic.
I do. There's getting a somewhat lighter note. There's an interesting lawsuit going on right now called COPA versus Craig Wright. Craig Wright is the guy who claims to be the man who invented Bitcoin. And he's been suing people to say, you can't put the Bitcoin white paper on your site. I own it. Now, COPA is, what's the acronym stand for? I'll give it to you real quick. Is the Cryptocurrency Open Patent Alliance. And they're filing a lawsuit against Wright in the United Kingdom over his copyright claims of the Bitcoin white paper. Now, Bitcoin white paper, what is it? That's basically this guy, Japanese name Satoshi Nakamoto, is the guy who allegedly created Bitcoin with his white paper he wrote, talking about decentralization. Nobody knows who
Satoshi is.
Nobody does, but this guy Wright claims he is. Now, the whole spirit of Bitcoin is about decentralization, and this guy's trying to put a monopoly on the information. So that's sketchy right there. But it's a fascinating lawsuit, and COPA keeps saying, okay, all you have to do is prove to us that you're actually Satoshi. And of course, they can't do that. But this is actually going to trial in the United Kingdom. And it should be a fascinating one to watch. And it speaks to a lot of the issues going on with the central bank digital currencies. You know, I think everyone knows where I stand on decentralization of currency and currency competition. And I'm also not a gigantic fan of Bitcoin, but I do think the idea of decentralized currency and using blockchain technology is certainly a solution. So I've just teed you up, Alan. Go to town.
Okie dokie. Where do I begin? I'm
That's
no
a high
fan.
T also. That's a high T. That ball is just perfect.
Yeah. The Bitcoin, whatever, crypto. First, one of my biggest problems with any of this is that it is fully electronic, which means there's no physical counterpart. If you believe that the energy grid will always be there, it will never be hacked, and whatever is in a bank account will always be there, you still are believing in fairy tales. It is desperately weak. It's controllable. This is what I have a problem with central bank digital currency, is that if you had a central bank digital currency within a country, then a very small group of people own and control the monetary system of the country. If you say something wrong, do something wrong, hang out with the wrong people like us, your account's going to be shut. Not only will it be shut, but you won't, if we're in the world of digital currency, well, you can only be paid in digital currency, which means your employer will be told, no, there's no account for this person. If you try to move this money to some other account for them, we're coming after you. You now become unemployable. This fully electronic, no. The other thing is people like decentralization. Well, it's nice to have decentralized power, but ultimately, and the founders figured this out with the Constitution, and tell me if you agree or not, Doug, excuse me, you had to have some centralization of power. And that's what the federal government was about, to have limited central powers to basically deal with the outside world for at that time, the 13 individual sovereign states. Okay. Agreed, Doug?
Absolutely.
Well, for me, again, I've written about this, and I discuss it, and I speak about it. You can find what I think about monetary systems at FedEd, feded.us, and my FedEd pamphlet. There's a point to centralizing the monetary system of a country as long as it is owned and controlled by the proper entity, we the people. Because when you have a singular monetary system, as opposed to a decentralized, you can use that system to actually fund your federal government, which means the federal government, which is going to have limited powers, will no longer need or have the ability to tax or borrow. This is what happens when you allow the people to fund the federal government to their desires, not the desires of the government. My old saying, what could go wrong if you leave the children home or the teenagers home alone for the weekend with the keys to the liquor cabinet, Corvette, and the credit card? That's what's going on now. The debt is at an all-time high and it keeps growing, now over 34 trillion. It is unpayable under the current system. It is a Ponzi scheme because the federal government has no for-profit business with which to repay. We, the people, need to take back control. Now, Doug would know better than me, but I think somewhere in Article 1, Section 8, the power to coin money, I'll use the word create, was given to Congress. And Congress was supposed to be a representation of the people. Well, somehow, some way, that power which was granted and vested with Congress, they gave it away with the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, which means the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 is unconstitutional. This monetary system is unconstitutional. And since the federal government has done such a poor job of doing what it was supposed to by just giving it away, we need to take it back. And I write about that in FedEd. Because a monetary system, it was created by people. Money was created by people for one specific reason, I believe. Direct barter sucks. It takes a lot of time. It's inefficient. They realize that if we have something, money, which is an indirect non-barter transaction facilitator, we can get business done a lot faster. And the reason a seller would take the money is because they can turn around and use it and be a buyer. That's why they finally got away from barter. It's just that we're not generally educated to understand how when you change the ownership of the power to create and extinguish money, add to the supply, take away from the supply, to the benefit of the people, which means we have to control it because we've seen what federal government does with it. We're not going to have a federal income tax, and we will ultimately pay off the debt. So I am not a fan of decentralization of this power. Other powers, as in what happens in the state, yes. But when our whole country is needing this one unifier, it belongs at a national level, but it needs to be controlled by we the people because the federal government has shown its total, utter failure on this topic. How's that?
Well, two things. One, and I've said this a number of times on the show, and I say this every time. I remember growing up, a very wise individual, and a number of wise individuals told me this, and it is also a common understanding in the financial world is you don't put all your eggs in one basket. By putting all of our currency into an electronic form, you're putting all of your eggs into one electricity basket. B, I want to go back to Article 1, Section 8, and you were very eloquent in how you presented that, and I am very proud of you. I want to add one more little wrinkle by indicating that Congress has the authority to coin money, create money, because they're coining it. That gives us the idea that that money has to have a physical form. They are coining it. They didn't use the word create. They could have used the word create. They used the word coin because they wanted it to have physical form. And to go to a digital only currency would then violate that very idea.
Thank you, Doug. Brady, any thoughts?
Well, I got a question for Doug. This popped up over the last couple of weeks, and I don't think we've talked about this on the show or to each other. Article 10th Amendment states that any power not specific.
Yeah, I was confused there for a second because Article 10, actually, if you wanted to get technically, would be the
Third Amendment.
Yeah, but anyway, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, that's fine. I think it'd be the Second Amendment since we've completely ignored the fact that Article 5 even exists. So why don't we just pretend that doesn't exist, just like the missing 13th Amendment?
But anyway, 10th Amendment, go ahead. One of my favorite parts of the Constitution.
It basically states that, any power not specifically granted to the federal government nor specifically barred to the states remains in the hands of the states and the people.
Right.
Well, as you just said, the ability to create money wasn't necessarily granted to the federal government. Therefore, could the states not create money? And therefore, would not Texas's attempt to having a silver and gold backed currency in the state of Texas be constitutional?
Now, Article 1, Section 10 prohibits the states from creating their own money.
I thought you said coin, not create. There's a difference. Didn't you just make that difference?
Yeah, but the creation of money and coining money is the same, but coining it means there's creation of a physical form.
Well, personally, I think it's a bad idea for every state to have its own currency because that would be an absolute mess.
Founders thought that'd be a bad idea too.
Yeah, but I think there's an argument to be made that Texas certainly thinks they have the ability to do it, and we haven't hit that one in a while. We'll come back to that another time.
Well, the Article 1, Section 10 is interesting because first it says they can't coin the money. And they cannot emit bills of credit, which includes paper money and as well as instruments of debt, such as bonds and things like that. And then it says make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debts. So if there's going to be any payment of debts, it has to be done in gold and silver, or at least in something that is representative of it. And that's what they're using as an excuse for their making the money. They say, well, we're going to use gold and silver. That's what it says we're supposed to use. But that was a reference to what the money being produced by the federal government was supposed to be. It was gold and silver.
They could not be in competition with the federal government.
Right. You can't have multiple currencies. And that proved to be a problem. And the Continental's script, if you want to call it that, was acceptable until the Union was together, and then it wasn't because it was creating confusion. And that was the idea. I think based on the language, a state cannot make its own money. It cannot create its own money, even if it's not coined or a bill of credit. But then again, that's where crypto comes in. Crypto isn't a state or the federal government creating money. It is something that is being used as a means of exchange outside the system. So it would be unaffected by it because it's private. That's where it gets interesting.
Well, so that ties
But
back.
I would say the states can't, but for it to happen in the private world, I don't see why not.
Well,
I do.
I'm a big fan of currency competition because it keeps governments honest. I'm a big fan of tax competition because it keeps governments honest.
Mm-hmm.
If your money has the ability to cross borders to where it's being treated in a much more fair manner, by all means, you should be able to do that. That'll keep your government honest. But the solution to this, I have believed for quite some time, blockchain technology is a fantastic key to what's going forward. It is not a one-size-fits-all solution. What we need is a decentralized currency that has a physical component that is based by a basket of commodities that includes gold, silver, commodities, real estate, etc., that's able to float on a free and fair market system that cannot be manipulated by any small committee. Now, can that be done? Yeah, in theory, it can. That takes a lot of political will that's currently lacking. And we're going to be dealing with a whole lot of bumpy roads to get to a place where we can have that conversation.
Well, if things keep going the way they're going, in my opinion, gold, silver, and electronic currency and crypto none of those are the currency of the future. If things keep going the way they're going, the currency of the future is going to be bullets.
Well, lead can be one of those commodities it's backed by, lead and brass.
Well, what are the two most precious metals?
Yeah, lead
and steel.
Lead and steel.
The thing, I'll take the other side of what Brady's talking about, which is, way back in the day, in the 1800s, you had banks creating their own monies, and depending on its reputation, if you took it outside the area or you took it outside the state, it may or may not have the value that it had in the area of the bank. I want a unifying form of money. I want the supply controlled and limited for the benefit of the country. You can't do that with a decentralized kind of money. The other is when the people control the supply, control the system, we can choose to fund the federal government to the level we want, and that would be to the constitutional level, which means now the federal government no longer taxes and no longer borrows. We are now in control. That's what Congress was supposed to do, and that's what Congress kicked the bucket with. So now it's time to take it back, because what really matters with money is, does it facilitate the indirect non-barter transaction? And if it does, that's great. We are now no longer controlled by those that create it. And we all have the constant known value. And when our currency or money is tied to a country that does not have national debt, does not have crazy taxation, it's going to have a lot of value. Any last topic to discuss?
Yeah, we may as well do a quick one because as part of the currency, True Patriot in chat
Mm-hmm.
made a comment. I'm going to read the first one real quick.
Thank you.
He said, crypto, wait a minute, where is it? What about backed by U.S. resources like land and oil? And I thought I mentioned that that's one of the things that should be backed by. And then he followed it up with, where is it? Yes, monetize all U.S. federal land. Well, Alan, you want to talk about whether the U.S. should have any federal land? Can you do it?
Well, wait a second. Didn't that what Andrew Jackson did to pay off the national debt? He sold federal
He sold land, and that's how he
that he wasn't supposed to have in the first place. But
yeah.
well, then that ties into actually something I wanted to talk about too. Is how Florida passed a law limiting the ownership of real property by Chinese citizens and those who are connected to the Chinese Communist Party. But the federal court, I think it's was it the Fifth Circuit? One of the federal courts said, 11th Circuit said you can't do that because that violates equal protection clause. Everybody should be able to buy land, including the communists that want to kill us. I seem to remember when I read the Virginia Ratifying Convention notes that was a fear of a lot of people at that time, is that foreigners would be buying our property. But by going back to what our good friend on the hamster said here, or the war hamster said, is, well, if we liquidate federal land, who's going to buy it?
Well, before we get to that, and we'll get to the Florida issue, and we've talked about this before, but we'll go back to it. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17. The first part talks about the 10 square miles for D.C. Then it goes on, and to exercise like authority over all places purchased by the consent of the legislature of the state in which the same shall be. That means the state legislature has to authorize the purchase by the federal government for the erection of forts, magazines, arsenals, dockyards, and other needful buildings. That's it. Nowhere in here is there a national forest or anything else. It's not constitutional.
Correct.
And if you look at, you can go to my website, feded.us, to look for my article on land grab and the summation of information I obtained from, I can't believe I'm blanking on it. What's the group I got all the land? Sorry, blanking on it. No. It's the Congressional Research Service.
Oh.
So I'll accept it as good. If all the federal government can have outside of D.C. is for forts, magazines, arsenal, dockyards, and needful buildings, why does it currently own 27% of the U.S.? And why would it have the ability, the legal constitutional authority, to own mineral rights? I'm going to say it doesn't. Which means, no, I don't want to monetize the land held by the federal government. I want the states to take their land back, because it does not constitutionally belong to the federal government. And I recently did a little research on Yosemite. Yosemite is a national park in California.
Yeah, that was the beginning of the madness, wasn't it?
Well, part of it was.
The first national park was
Yellowstone.
Thank you.
But the thing is that California came out of being held by Mexico in 1848. It wasn't ever official territory. It was just administered by the.
Well, it was a republic that was asking to join the Union, is what it was.
Well, from what I saw, it was administered by the federal authorities, military, until it became a state in 1850. Became a state in September 1850. It was a free state. Slavery was absolutely not allowed in the state. That's 1850. 1864, with a bunch of maneuvering by certain people, they got Abraham Lincoln to sign a bill late 1864 during the Civil War that told California, and they're talking about like 1,500 square miles. Yes, you can have Yosemite as long as you don't allow, and I'm paraphrasing, don't allow it to be developed. It's for recreation and resort. Excuse me? The federal
So we're going
government?
to take control of your land and let you have control of it under our rules.
Right. Well, you can have it as long as you do what we tell you. And then in the early 1900s, the federal government took the land back. This is the problem when Congress is allowed to pass laws, even propose them, without first going through a constitutional review. That is what I would really like to see. But this has happened over and over again. Even if the federal government purchased it, even if the federal government got state legislature approval, if it's not for the specific things in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17, then it is not constitutional, which means you hold it unconstitutionally, illegally, we're going to take it back.
We already have a constitutional review. It's just under a different name.
Yes.
Judicial review.
No. I'm sorry. I didn't make myself clear. Constitutional review.
Oh, that would be, I think we have a word for that. It's called nullification.
No, see, nullification is something that happens after the problem exists. What I'm talking about is preventing the problem from existing.
And that is actually, believe it or not, James Madison discusses that in Federalist Paper number 49, where the states should have conventions to discuss the constitutionality, to constitutional review, to audit the federal government. My friend has coined it Republic Review, Constitutional Review, Republic Review, however you want to call it. But this is something that James Madison wrote about in Federalist Paper 49, where the state should hold conventions to audit and review federal activities, and if they deem them to be unconstitutional, then either use a convention of states to pass to propose and ultimately pass an amendment that will disallow the federal government from doing what they're doing, or use nullification as a tool. So there you go.
Well, we're about to run out of time, but what I'd like to say on this is that these are all possibilities after the problem exists. I'm talking about preventing the problem. Before.
Well, that's called the Second Amendment. Oh, wait, no.
No.
Well, that's afterwards.
And maybe we need a new law, maybe a new amendment. But it's this: Congress passes a law, and it's going to send it to the Oval Office for signature. Okie dokie. But before it can go on that straight route, it's got to go into another room, and the room is constitutional experts, authorities, an odd number of them, and they have to rule on the constitutionality of the law being proposed.
And what you do is you wind up with a bunch of lawyers on that panel, and you wind up with judicial review. I'm telling you.
No, you've got to have people who actually know it, and if this is to prevent it from getting to the Oval Office,
right?
That's
I get what
my
you're
point.
saying. I'm just telling you the reality of what you'll wind up with.
Well, we'll see.
Maybe Madison should have been a bit more loud of that on the floor in Philadelphia, because it is something that's needed, obviously.
Right.
And I'd like to see it done before the fact, not after the fact. We're running out of time, so I don't want to rush this. Dougie, promote yourself.
I am Douglas V. Gibbs, douglasvgibbs.com. Mr. Constitution is what I go by. I have a new book getting ready to come out. I have 9 books already in existence. You want to check them out, find them online by Douglas V. Gibbs. My most recent one is Repeal Democracy. That's been my popular one. The history book, part 1. I almost feel like History of the World Part 1, but it's History of the United States Part 1, early American history up to the election of Jefferson coming soon. DouglasVGibbs.com. Become a patron. Hit the join now, the join link there with the star next to it. $9 a month, you help fund what I do. And so book number 10, and it's only almost 700 pages. Right now it's at 686 pages, it looks like. So
Oh my
that's
gosh.
the next one.
Thank you, Doug. Brady, please.
Best place to find me is on my Rumble channel, war_hamster. Spell it correctly. I've been putting out about 3 or 4 shows a week lately. Some of them with Doug, and some with a couple other people. And of course, I always feature the For the Republic broadcast there about a day after the show. If you want to watch the replay of this, I put out a show on Friday. Sorry, I did it Saturday morning, about 28 hours ago, with a woman named Colonel Tanner Watkins, and we talked about Robert Maxwell. Somebody's sharing that out there because I've got over 3,000 views on it in less than 24 hours, which breaks all of my channel's records. So you want to go check this out. Apparently, it's popular. We talked about, Robert Maxwell, father of Ghislaine Maxwell, and my channel is just exploding in the last day or two. So that's cool. You can also get me on Twitter at war_hamster1776 or True Social under war_hamster.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. For me, here on Sundays, you're already here, so it doesn't matter. Saturdays, normally 1 to 3 p.m. West Coast time, KMET 14.9 to AM. That stands for
Did I not mention
America.
that? Oh.
Yeah. Constitution Radio, hosted by Douglas V. Gibbs. My website, FedEd, FEDED.us, for basic monetary system education. You'll also be able to find articles I've written for The Flame. Check out theflameusa.com. My latest one's there, which is on Natural Born Citizen. The Flame, you can get it as a physical paper. Go to theflameusa.com. And I am very happy to note that through a channel, my article on Natural Born Citizen made its way to, yes, Mr. G. Edward Griffin. He's taken it and he's putting it in his reference materials. So I'm very happy about that. Gentlemen, I want to thank you for being here today. Another really good time. I see, well, we're still got 2 minutes. Any last thoughts, Brady?
Oh, you're going to throw that at me? Any last thoughts?
No. Oh, fine. Okay, I'll do it. No, you take it.
I gave you all the thoughts I had. There's a limited supply here.
Well, you want to ask the hamster behind you? No.
No, I have a thought. You brought up G. Edward Griffin, and most people don't know, but all 3 of us on this show have met him personally.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, and I'm actually going to have Doug remind him that he did promise me an interview on my channel. I want to do that in the next month or so. I've been looking forward to that. He's a personal hero, and meeting him in person was one of the honors of my life. He's a fantastic gentleman in his 90s and still sharp as a tack.
And the group, Red Pill Expo, is planning an event in June. We'll go back to Rapid City, South Dakota, where I was there 3 years ago when I gave my presentation about 5 women of the American Revolution. A lot of fun. Doug, any last thoughts?
United we stand, combined we kick butt. God bless America, my friends. God bless you. I will see you next time. Why don't you do your sign out now?
Well, I will. Alan Myers here. This has been another episode of For the Republic. To all you good people out there, you lovers and defenders of liberty, freedom, rights, individuality, equality of opportunity for all. To all you patriots, yeah, you know who you are. Till next time, may you be and stay safe and well. Patriot out. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being on the channel.